Keys to victory for the Tyson Fury Deontay Wilder trilogy fight. Now, back in March 2020, as you can see here, I made this video. This was very shortly after their second fight and also very shortly after Deontay Wilder's team exercised the rematch clause for this trilogy match. Now, in this video, I spoke about possible tactics that Deontay Wilder could use for the third fight. And I mentioned the prospect of Deontay Wilder maybe boxing on the back foot, trying to mess Tyson Fury about, because what he attempted to do in the second fight, which was what he tried to do in the first fight, and that is come forward and impose himself on Tyson Fury and get the knockout, that backfired in spectacular fashion in the rematch. Therefore, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it is broke, then you need to fix it. You need to change stuff. So in this video, I'm just going to play a few seconds of it. I talked about how he could change certain things. Maybe not to win the fight, because it's possible that there's no way he can win the fight. All right. But it's also possible that if he's not going to win, perhaps just do better than he did second time around. So I talk about this here. Let me just play a few seconds. And perhaps Deontay Wilder will use his legs a bit more. Box on the back foot, move around. Now, he's obviously not very graceful. He's not very well coordinated. So you wouldn't have thought that type of strategy would be tremendously effective against Tyson Fury, but he might be able to make it a bit awkward for him if he decided to do that, move around. And remember, Tyson Fury at 273 pounds, he might weigh the same amount next time. You can outmaneuver a guy that size. I don't care how good Tyson Fury is. If you're small enough, and Deontay Wilder is a small heavyweight, he's tall and he's rangy, but he's small. He doesn't weigh much. So if he comes into the third fight, maybe around 215, definitely under 220, he might have the ability to just mess Tyson Fury around a little bit, run away from him, do what he criticized Anthony Joshua for doing against Andy Ruiz, and maybe stretch the fight out into the later rounds, maybe try and frustrate Tyson Fury boxing that way. So that's what I mentioned back in March 2020. I want to expand on that a little bit and also maybe amend it slightly. Now, Deontay Wilder in the second fight was swimming against the current because he had a guy in front of him whose arms were even longer than his, who was physically bigger than him, and who was imposing his size and imposing his jab. And that's one of the keys to victory for Tyson Fury, is his jab. Deontay Wilder, believe it or not, actually managed to match Tyson Fury for jabs, I think through the first 2 rounds of their second fight. But after that, particularly with the rough stuff on the inside and Tyson Fury just being more consistent, and Tyson Fury's jab was harder than Deontay Wilder's jab. It was knocking Deontay Wilder back. Wilder just couldn't get his body weight forward. In the first fight, because Tyson Fury was moving around, Wilder was able to get a lot more power on the jab, getting his weight forward, getting his momentum into it. But Tyson Fury took all that away by landing his jab more consistently and really forcing Deontay Wilder back. Deontay, rather than going with the flow, he was trying to swim against the stream. He was trying to swim against the current. And if you're in a river and you're trying to stop yourself from drowning or trying to stop yourself from being swept out to sea, the worst thing you can do is turn your back to the direction of the sea and start trying to swim up current, isn't it? Because you're not going to see the hazards that are coming. Big boulders, jagged rocks, maybe a waterfall. Not only are you not going to see the hazards, but it's not going to work, right? You're trying to swim against the current. The current's too strong, like Tyson Fury was too strong for Deontay Wilder in that second fight. You're also going to miss the opportunities if you're trying to swim against the current. Opportunities like low-hanging branches, or maybe a bottleneck in the river where you might be able to get to shore, because the objective is the same. Regardless of whether you're swimming against the current or with the current, your objective is to try and get on dry land so you don't drown. But in virtually every situation, you're better off going with the current in order to meet your objective, to get to dry land and prevent yourself from drowning. Once you're facing in the direction of the sea, you can see the hazards, the obstacles, but also the opportunities coming a long way off. Whereas when you've got your back to the sea and you're trying to swim up current, you're missing everything. Okay? This is what Deontay Wilder was doing against Tyson Fury in the rematch, trying to swim against the tide. In this trilogy fight, he needs to change his mentality. Rather than trying to force something that's just not happening, go with the flow. If Tyson Fury wants to push you back, let him push you back. In fact, emphasize that. Move around the ring. Get Tyson Fury to maybe overcommit and overextend and frustrate him. You see? Now, I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about here. This is a fight from 2004 between Vladimir Klitschko and Devaryl Williamson. Now, Devaryl Williamson was a similar kind of fighter to Deontay Wilder, a bit technically better, but a tall, skinny heavyweight with a big right hand. And against Vladimir Klitschko here, who was with Manny Stewart by this point, this was the fight after the Lamont Brewster fight, right? The first fight with Brewster where he lost. So he'd been with Stewart for a few fights. He was developing that Kronk style, and he was on the front foot. Similar to Tyson Fury when he fought Deontay Wilder second time, Vladimir Klitschko was on the front foot, walking Devaryl Williamson down with a jab. But unlike Deontay Wilder, Williamson wasn't trying to swim against the current. Williamson was going with the flow. He was allowing Klitschko. He wasn't trying to push back. He was allowing Klitschko to be the aggressor. And he was moving around the ring, and he was waiting for an opportunity where Klitschko would maybe get a little frustrated and overcommit with a right hand or overreach with it, leave himself vulnerable defensively, and then he would trigger his own right hand and capitalize. And that's exactly what happened in this fourth round. I'm not going to play the clip, but that's exactly what happened in the fourth round. Vladimir Klitschko threw the right hand from just slightly the wrong range and slightly the wrong angle. Devaryl Williamson exploded with his own right hand countering, and down went Vladimir Klitschko. Now, Klitschko got up to win the fight, but it was a moment of anxiety, certainly for Klitschko. And it's the kind of thing that Deontay Wilder and his team should be looking to do, in my opinion, against Tyson Fury from a strategic standpoint. Rather than, again, swimming against the current, go with the flow and take what Tyson Fury gives you. If he's being aggressive, try and use his aggression against him. And if Tyson Fury does decide to try and box, then obviously Deontay Wilder can go forward and try and land some big shots, particularly with Tyson Fury apparently being at least 270, maybe 290 for this trilogy fight. Is he really going to be as slick as he was when he was in the 250s? Maybe he will, right? He shocked me with the way he boxed so well on the front foot in the 270s last time out. Maybe he'll shock me boxing on the back foot in the 290s. Tyson Fury really is a bag of surprises. But I certainly would be very surprised if Tyson Fury can be as slick and maneuver himself as well at 290 on the back foot the way he can in the 250s or even the low 260s. So, yeah, I think Deontay needs to take what Tyson Fury gives him, stop trying to force it, and the mindset that they seem to have got Deontay Wilder in. You know, I spoke about Wilder being like Dumbo, you know, the Disney cartoon character, and I use this comparison because Wilder has a very childish mind. Okay, his emotional and mental state is very childish. But with Dumbo, he had this magic feather that he was given. And they made Dumbo believe that this magic feather allowed him to fly. The reality is he could fly all along without the magic feather. But he needed the magic feather to give him the confidence. He needed something that he felt was greater than himself to put confidence in to allow him to fly, right? With Deontay Wilder, his feather is this fantasy they've concocted for him, that Tyson Fury cheated and all this kind of stuff. And I say concocted for him because if you think back, it wasn't actually Deontay Wilder that originally started coming out with this stuff. It was his brother Marcellus and other people in his team that started putting all that nonsense out. And then they've sold this to Deontay. He very rarely comes up with ideas himself, Deontay. It's other people putting these ideas in his head. Yeah, they've given him this magic feather and he's holding on to it for dear life. And that's why he appears to be so calm at the moment, because he truly believes in this magic feather that he's got. So the calmness is going to help him take what Tyson Fury gives him by way of opportunities. If Tyson Fury wants to force the fight, push you on the back foot, okay, move around. You know, go backwards faster than Tyson Fury's coming forwards. That way, Tyson Fury's going to have to overextend and reach at you with his punches. And that's going to give you an opportunity to hit him with shots. And Deontay Wilder has caught people coming in before. Luis Ortiz, in the first fight, he caught him coming in. I think the first knockdown was from a situation like that, where Ortiz had backed Wilder up to the ropes. And Wilder came with a right hand when Ortiz overcommitted, and that started a sequence of events where Ortiz ended up on the canvas. Artur Szpilka was another good example. Deontay Wilder was losing that fight. And it wasn't until Szpilka got over-aggressive, pushed Deontay Wilder back to the ropes, that's when Wilder managed to walk him onto a right hand. So Wilder does have a history of being able to walk people onto shots who get over-aggressive with him. You know, they overcommit and he hits him with that big right hand. I mean, even Dominic Breazeale in that first round, he knocked Dominic Breazeale out when they were in the middle of the ring. But if you remember, Breazeale backed him into a corner. Wilder, that is. He backed Wilder into a corner. He hurt Wilder, but then Wilder came back with a shot and backed Breazeale off. In fact, I think that happened even prior to that. It happened a few times. It was a wild first round, that fight. But yeah, that's my take on Deontay Wilder and what he needs to do. As far as his jab, he was jabbing with Tyson Fury in the first fight very well, but that's because Fury's jab wasn't as powerful as it was in the second fight. In the second fight, Fury's jab was more consistent. It proved to be more powerful, so Wilder was jabbing with him for like a couple rounds. After that, he just couldn't keep up. So the key to trying to avoid Tyson Fury's jab is to move your head. Now, it's more difficult to teach a guy to move his head in a short space of time than it is to move his feet. Moving your feet is easier. So preferably what Deontay Wilder needs to do, if he can't master the head movement of slipping jabs, is just stay out of range as much as you can, as I've already explained, and get Tyson Fury to overcommit, and then you come in with a shot Devarro Williamson style, if he does have the ability to learn very quickly, then yeah, try and slip some jabs. Because when you slip a jab, it's not just you avoiding being hit, it's also you putting doubt in the mind of your opponent. Once you can make your opponent miss the shots that he's really trying to commit to and throw, he starts to feel vulnerable. Well, if I'm missing this shot, it's just a matter of time before I get countered with a right hand. You see? And then they start getting more tentative with their jab. And they have to start thinking more about what they're doing and doing more thinking and less punching. And that gives Deontay Wilder time to actually implement what he wants to do. You see? So, like I say, key to victory for Wilder, don't swim against the tide. Go with the flow. Take what Tyson Fury gives you. Stay out of range of his jab. If you're not able to slip it, just stay out of range. And if Tyson Fury decides to box on the back foot, absolutely you can go for it. So that's the keys to victory, at least from my perspective, for Deontay Wilder in this trilogy fight. Now, for Tyson Fury, the keys to victory for him are to frustrate Deontay Wilder. Deontay is a very emotional character. And because he's an emotional character, that can work for him in some instances, but it can also work against him. Because when the red mist descends, he's no longer thinking logically. And here's me mentioning logic and rational thinking in the same sentence as Deontay Wilder. It's a bit absurd, but there you go. Whatever tiny semblance of logic and rational thinking he has will evaporate once the red mist descends. So you want that red mist to descend. And Tyson Fury knows this. He's been trying to wind Deontay Wilder up in the build up to this fight, certainly at the press conference or what have you. I'm sure that's going to continue. So you need to also continue that in the ring. Wind Wilder up, goad him. He was doing it in the first fight as well. Sticking his tongue out and doing all this kind of stuff because he knows he has an emotional guy in front of him. And if he can get him to, get carried away with his emotions, it plays into Tyson Fury's hands. He can feed off that energy and he can draw more mistakes from an emotional guy who's so angry and just wants to get him. And Wilder's also burning up energy if Tyson Fury can do that. Now, in the first fight, he got Deontay Wilder frustrated by being elusive. Yeah, by moving his head, nice boxing on the back foot in the middle of the ring, lots of jabs and all this kind of stuff. And Wilder just couldn't land his big power shots. So he was very frustrated. In the second fight, he did both. He was elusive, but because he was so aggressive, his offense became more of his defense. He was, backstepping and all that kind of stuff very well when Deontay Wilder was shaping up to fight a right hand. But Tyson Fury put Deontay Wilder on the defensive to such a degree that the right hand was nullified. And Deontay was very frustrated because he couldn't come forward. He wanted to come forward, but he couldn't. You see, and that's where the frustration sets in. If he hadn't been so frustrated, then maybe he would have thought, okay, let me adjust something here. Let me start moving my head away from the jab. Maybe I'll stay out of range of the jab, use my legs a little bit. But there was none of that because he was too emotionally invested in what he wanted to do. His whole training camp had been about that. All his fans telling him that he's this destructive puncher and he'd knock out a prime Mike Tyson, all this nonsense. This is what was swirling around in Deontay Wilder's tiny mind during that second fight. Okay? And again, Tyson Fury needs to keep him in that state. So whether it's on the front foot or on the back foot, Tyson Fury needs to keep his man frustrated. Yeah? And obviously, nothing succeeds like success. So the better Tyson Fury is doing with his jab. The jab will be key. It was certainly key in the second fight, I would say even more so than the first fight. Because with that jab being longer than Deontay Wilder's jab, it's hitting Deontay before he can either land his own jab or get the right hand off. You see? So that jab nullifies. Deontay has to reset every time he gets hit with that jab. So if Deontay is not slipping that and he's not staying out of range with that, then obviously Tyson Fury needs to keep concentrating on the jab. It's going to set all his other offense up. And the body punches in the first fight were also very, very good for Tyson Fury. He dropped Deontay Wilder with a body shot, being very physical with him in the clinches. And also, if Tyson Fury does, despite his high weight, decide to box a little bit in this fight, he needs to still go to the body and he needs to still be rough in the clinches. I'm not saying be illegal, but just be rough and be physical in the clinches, because that took a lot out of Deontay. Deontay's talking about his suit being too heavy and his drink being spiked and all this other nonsense. The reality is he was in there with a very big, physically strong man who imposed himself on Deontay Wilder. And Wilder's not used to that. He's not used to a guy the size of Tyson Fury imposing himself physically on him like that. It's draining. I see some people talk about clinching in boxing. Oh, why is he letting this guy clinch him? Why is he letting the other? It's his own fault for allowing the guy to clinch him. These are people that haven't been in a boxing ring and actually fought anybody. Because when you're in there with someone who's bigger and stronger than you, trying to stop them from clinching you is easier said than done. And when they do start clinching you, and there's nothing you can do about it because they've got the technique down pat and they're very big and strong, it wears you out very, very quickly. You see? And that's what happened to Deontay against Tyson Fury. He got worn out. I don't want to say as much by the rough stuff on the inside, but it certainly contributed a lot to Deontay Wilder's deteriorating condition. Not as much as the punches, but, definitely a significant amount, because he's just not used to that bodily contact with somebody so big, imposing themselves on him. So I think that's another key for Tyson Fury. Now, what I'm expecting in this fight is Deontay to be better mentally prepared than he was second time around, because he knows Tyson Fury can impose himself. He knows Tyson Fury can box on the back foot. So he's under no illusions. He's under plenty of illusions, but in terms of what Tyson Fury can actually do style-wise and strength-wise, he might think that he had egg weights in his gloves and all this kind of rubbish, and that's what knocked off his equilibrium or whatever. But he knows Tyson Fury has the confidence to come forward. He knows Tyson Fury's got a good jab on the front foot. He knows he's physically strong on the inside. He knows these things. The element of surprise, as many people are saying, has gone for Deontay Wilder. He was so shocked by Tyson Fury's tactics in that second fight, as I was, that he remained in a state of shock. He was totally perplexed throughout that fight. Even by the end, remember that image of Deontay kind of glassy-eyed and the referee stepping in to stop it, and Deontay kind of lurched forward? You remember his face? He was still in a state of shock at that point. So, yeah, Deontay's going to be, I think, better prepared for what Tyson Fury can bring. Tyson Fury, I think, is going to have to go longer in this fight. I'm not going to reveal my prediction now. Maybe I'll save it for one of the videos I'm going to do tomorrow. But Tyson Fury, I think, is going to have to go a bit longer than he did last time out. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he smashes him to pieces early, but I'm anticipating a longer fight. And I've been saying this since last year, that I think it will go longer. Since this rematch was initially announced for last year, I was saying, I think this fight's going to carry on. Was it announced for last year? It was, well, yeah, because they were negotiating the Undisputed fight for ages. I forget how it went now. It's all a blur this past 18 months. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below about the keys to victory for Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. What do you think Deontay Wilder needs to do? Do you think what I'm saying about him messing Tyson Fury around, De'Vara Williamson style, moving around the ring and going with the flow rather than trying to swim against the current, do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that's what he will do? Or do you think that's just antithetical to his nature because he's such an aggressive character that there's no way he'll try and move around, because he criticized Anthony Joshua for doing that, right? In the Andy Ruiz rematch, is he really going to make a hypocrite of himself and attempt to do that himself? You guys let me know what you think in the comments below. And as for Tyson Fury, what are you expecting from him? How do you think he should approach this fight? Should he, as I keep saying, try to frustrate Wilder? So just to clarify that point, I'm saying whatever Wilder wants to do, Tyson Fury needs to do the opposite. If Wilder is happy moving backwards, Tyson Fury needs to not go forwards. He needs to say, you know what? I'm going to move backwards, Deontay. He needs to literally do the opposite of whatever Deontay wants to do. Yeah? And you could say something similar for Deontay Wilder, but for him, it's less about trying to, well, no, it is about trying to frustrate Fury, but it's more about trying to get the mistakes from a stylistic and tactical point of view. Yeah? Tyson Fury is more in control of his emotions than Deontay Wilder. With Wilder, it's really about trying to frustrate him and get him angry. Whereas with Fury, it's trying to get Fury maybe overconfident, to get Fury to be maybe a little bit lackadaisical, you know? Yeah, you're frustrating him, but Fury's not really angry that much in the ring. Sometimes he used to be back in the days angry, but for the most part, he's a very calm character in the ring, you know? And he's usually got one up on you. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about everything I've discussed in this video. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.